and we're going to get ready to get started. So this evening is an evening on leadership, and we've entitled it, "The World Asks for Your Leadership." I am Inely Cesna, the founder of the Institute for Next Level Leadership.
I'm Mike Murphy, the co-founder.
Yes, we offer programs on leadership, and that includes what, as we will see today, a whole new way of dealing with ourselves and with one another in the world. We call it this next level leadership. It's the leadership that comes from a place within, that it's beyond our thoughts, beyond our emotions, beyond the ego, if you will. A place within that is of great wisdom and great interconnectedness.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. So we have here Karma and Ingrid. They're both graduates of our programs. Martha, welcome. It's wonderful to have you. I want to make sure you know this is being recorded, and we usually post this in our website. So if you share, you're just agreeing to be part of the video. If you don't share, you won't be appearing on the video. But thank you for being here with us tonight. This is a time we thought of this title, "The World Asks for Your Leadership," and it coincidentally fell. We chose this title like a year ago, but coincidentally it fell right in the week that we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the World Trade Center event, and it seems so appropriate because I think, just as we all remember, the events of 9/11, it started, for me at least, it started there, to recognize that there is an opportunity in the world for a new kind of leadership, one in which we could relate to one another from compassion, understanding, acceptance, and we could grow from that relationship. And so many years have gone by, 20 years since 9/11, but also 20 years in my journey and in our journey together. We've been married for 20 years. And so all this time has gone by in terms of developing this experiential view of leadership, that perhaps we can plant a seed out in the world and support others to come from that place within as they lead themselves, their families, and their organizations out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And as you can imagine, that Inely and I both come from fairly different backgrounds, but fairly common experience, which is leading and having been led by a number of people over a number of years in the corporate world, in the legal world, et cetera. And I absolutely love this topic, because I believe, and I believe Inely does as well, the world has been asking this question for a long, long time. And there's a reason that we ask questions for a long, long time, is because we haven't received an answer yet. It's almost like being a kid again with some of these topics. Leadership to us, in a nutshell, comes from within, and based on a experiential and foundational belief that if you can lead yourself, from within, you can lead anything.
Yeah, and the idea of leadership coming from within is a beautiful idea, but when we go within, what do we find in there? That's the question. The within is a whole new universe with many eyes, and each of these different eyes inside of us have different interests and different goals and different motivations. And so exploring the many eyes in us so that we can really find that part in us that motivates us all towards that which we are here to manifest, that it goes far beyond the ego. It's a whole journey in and of itself. And we have realized that the evolution of consciousness, the evolution of going inside, looking at all these different eyes inside of us and deciding, where in there is my sustenance? Where inside of me do I find that empowerment that goes far beyond my egos and my ideas and my views of what empowerment should be? We recognize that there is a journey that we play there. And if we call that place inside love, it could be any name, but for lack of a better name, let's call it love. This evolution of consciousness that happens, it's a movement that first go towards love. Then it acts with love. And then it becomes as love. This is the cycle of evolution. And it goes again, we go towards something, then we act with that something, and then we become that. And we go again and again around this evolutionary path in discovering who we truly are from within so that we can lead from that place.
I have a question.
Yeah, wonderful.
I have a question. And I actually have an answer, but I am very curious if any of you have an answer. Why do you think the world is asking for your leadership? And if so, what is it and why? And if you'd like to think about that for a little
If
bit.
I were to jump in.
Okay.
Especially particularly working with young people, youth, the world is asking for leadership because I'm in front of them all the time and they're so so many of them, if I ask them, what's your light wattage, what's your light radiance, like from 1 to 100, like if you were a light bulb, what would your light wattage be, and to hear them say stuff like 40 and 50 and 60, and just to put the question to them that way and them to be so aware of it. And I'm like, do you know that you were born at 100% wattage, or even more? You were so bright. What can we do to help you get your light wattage back? This little light of mine, So just that, first of all, to even ask the question like you just did, and then to raise the awareness, and then to have them come up with an action plan. But those people that, and this, whatever particular group you're called to work with, I think it's the same thing. So when we're being asked to show up, asked to lead.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I give you, Inely and I were talking about this, this afternoon. Why is the world asking? And I think it's because it hasn't really had an answer. And our experience has been, my experience has been, I grew up and, well, some people would argue that concept, but I have grown up, and experienced a lot of leaders. Most of them I call boss, and I did what they asked me to do. And then when I became one and somebody called me boss, I kind of realized that yesterday I couldn't spell it and today I are one, and so I tried to answer that question for myself. And the one difference I noticed is most of the leaders that I've either worked for or experienced in other leadership roles, like presidents of governments and heads of state in other countries, people do what they're asked to do under their leadership, but they don't always follow them. And that's really the question, for me is, And that was true of myself also. I did what I was told to do, sometimes a little bit different. And there's a couple that I did follow, but most of them I didn't follow. And not that they weren't, some of them were pretty good, some of them were pretty bad. I learned from all of them, but it was interesting for me to notice the difference over time. And we'd kind of like to talk about that for a little bit. What is that difference, and where does it lie?
Yeah, this is this is what we want to bring forward to you today, and we call it culture. We tend to follow those that see the world the way we see, that believe in what we believe. And when we happen to deal with diversity or to deal with somebody who sees the world differently, there is difficulty in relating, there is difficulty in leadership, and this has been the source of wars and fights in the family and divorce and all kinds of separations and conflict. So what we would like to offer to you today is an opportunity to receive a perspective of the evolution of consciousness as evolutionary cycles that are taking place in humanity, and it's still expanding, one bringing forward the next. So every evolutionary cycle creates a set of circumstances that opens the door for the next evolutionary cycle, and then the next, and then the next, and so forth. And when we recognize the way these evolutionary cycles are all intertwined, one leads to the other, we recognize that we are actually all one and all. We are all originated from that same origin. Although when we forget this, we may see the other as a stranger, and we may not really relate from where they are coming from. So what we're going to talk to you today, it's actually a line of thought that has been the result of great research. It's called spirodynamics. There is a great author and facilitator called Deborah Uten. She has written books on this, and many other authors that have been involved in the development of this way of seeing. And so it starts with, it's very logical in a sense. It starts from the beginning of times, right? The beginning of times, think of caveman. So caveman was operating in a culture which they call survival sense. It's the instinctual drive to satisfy our basic needs. And our basic needs is food, water, shelter, and sex. And so from the place of the caveman view, their concept of self is the satisfaction of those immediate needs. And the mentality is a lot like you eat what you kill. You eat what you kill. And love for them, love in terms of evolution, has to do with survival. Love is survival. And we can see, I think there's a lot of people even nowadays that operates from this culture. You eat what you kill. And you can see that in corporations or in countries or in communities that are still operating from this perspective. You know, I'm Brazilian. I want to apologize for my accent in case you don't understand or there's a distortion in the way I pronounce the words. But in my country, there has been, you know, the favelas, the slums, where it's very much an environment of you eat what you kill, the survival of the strongest, and very much an individual sense of satisfying my immediate needs in order to survive.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
Well, no, but I hear what you're saying. I think it's simple and easy to understand. And the interesting thing is, it's actually, there's probably more evidence that it seems to repeat itself over time. You know, what Inely is talking about, you know, with some improvements, but it continues to repeat itself.
Yeah, so the problem, the disruptor, the shift in this mentality happens when we are all looking for our individual needs. We are all kind of killing each other to supply for our immediate needs. And then eventually the competition and the threats endangers my very survival. All we do is kill each other. And so that opens the door for the next evolutionary shift, which you can imagine it would be something like from cavemen. Then we started forming groups. We start recognizing, okay, if I'm part of a group, I'll be safer. And so we start forming groups sorted in a relationship with a world that we saw as very magical. It's like we got together in groups and we would keep the spirits away, you know, create rituals for that which we were trying to achieve or have as a result, either rain or harvest or whatever we needed. And there was an attention towards the safety of the tribe. And the individual needs were included in that intention. The safety of the tribe included this intention to support the individual needs. And there are still tribes nowadays, like in my country, in the Amazon, who operates like this, operates in a place where the world is magical, you know, there's the spirits out there, but the world is also still very mysterious and frightening to them. And so they come together in these little tribes, try to protect the tribe, satisfy their needs. And so love for them becomes the tribe. Love is being part of this tribe.
Yeah, fellow survivors.
Right, survival.
Even in Australia, they found a group of Aborigines. I mean, in the 20th century, that actually built towers towards the sky to worship these silver things that were flying over the outback, called airplanes. Okay? And so it's just, I mean, it's really interesting. It's
Yeah.
very, very interesting.
So this is a culture which we've named kin spirits, you know, relating to a magical, mysterious world from the perspective of the tribe. But then the disruptor happens when the tribe order becomes too confining, or the tribe grows too much, and then the survival becomes threatened because we can't really feed all of this. Not everybody wants to adhere to the rituals that we have and to our ways. And that comes the door for the next evolutionary cycle in consciousness, the next culture, which it's called, you know, the power gods. And it's a more egocentric culture, more impulsive culture, exploitative and control driven. So think of slavery, for example. So we decide to, let's capture some of these people out there, have them work for us. We're gonna do what we want, regardless of the consequence. There is little expression of guilt, and the individual needs, or the needs of a small part of the group outweighs the needs of the entire group. So you ended up having the victims and the perpetrators. You have a few haves and many have-nots. And coming from a Latin American country like Brazil, this was very present there, you know, a culture where the separation of the mass, you know, that have very little, with the few that are on top and have way too much, is very evident. And the corruption that comes from that. And it comes from a history of colonialism, a history where people came to the country to exploit the natural resources, stole it away, and utilize the people in the country to become slaves and to become the labor for what they needed to do to support the few. So love here becomes the individual needs, supplying the individual needs or the needs of those few on the top. And then the disruption happen when people start questioning that authority. And we can see this in many countries, I mean, including, Afghanistan right now,
Afghanistan. Yeah.
where, they have this very exploitative, control-driven culture with very little expression of guilt. And people are challenging that. They're challenging this kind of authority and its way. And so in that, it opens up for the next evolutionary shift, the next culture, which it's called in spiral dynamics the truth force. The truth force then becomes a culture organized in hierarchy, if you will. It's sort of patriarchal in that way. Think of aristocracy, for example. It has its divisions. The world is seen as a place that has to be controlled. It is purposeful, but it has to be controlled. It operates with greater levels of guilt and obedience. We have to be obedient to the authority. And if we're not, then there's all that guilt. But there is a desire here to do right, and to be good, and to have a purpose. But inequality is accepted as part of the natural structure. Like in aristocracy, we're all going to be fine as long as we stick to our roles here and we don't try to jump from one place or another in society.
Mhm.
So aristocracy is an example of this, but there's also the Crusades, jihad, this whole idea of salvation through sacrifice. I'm going to stay in my role and I'm going to sacrifice in my role so that we can all be happy in this structure. And a lot of companies still operate in a very hierarchical way in a culture like this.
Yeah. And it's very present today. It was the answer. Someone asked Aristotle, what would the ideal world look like? Aristotle, aristocracy, is where the word came from. And he said, oh, it's not that complicated. We're all born into a certain segment of society, and there's the top segment and the next segment and the next one. And I'd build that world to where each segment could grow within their level to be all that they could be, not to the next level. When Inely and I were first married, and Caitlin was little before she went to school, we spent a lot of time living in Brazil. And one of the things we did that was really a joy was we were teaching all of the what's the name? I can't remember the name.
The English?
Yeah.
You're teaching English?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the people that we were teaching.
Yeah. The caseiros.
Caseiros, yeah.
Caseiros were the housekeepers.
Yeah, they kept house or they took care of the yards and what have you. And we offered them English classes. And I mean, they just loved it. They came to the house. There must have been 15 or 20 of them in there at any one time. At the end of a year, they actually sang a song to me in English. It was really.
One of them named their son Michael.
Michael, yeah. But anyway, the interesting part was from the homeowners that lived in the neighborhood we lived in, we got a lot of pushback. Even from some of our Brazilian friends. What are you doing? These people belong in their place. And which kind of surprised me. Being a kid from New York, if you didn't want to go to school that was diverse, there wasn't any school to go to. It was really kind of interesting. And the neighborhoods were all, they were definitely diverse, not necessarily inclusive, okay, but they were definitely diverse.
So in a culture like this, where there are segments and you're only allowed to evolve within your segment, The disruptor becomes when we get tired to be in that segment. What if I don't want to be in this segment anymore? Like the housekeepers that start learning English so they can go into another segment. That starts creating a disruptor that opens the door to the next evolutionary cycle, the next culture called strive, drive, which is very independent, logical, based on competition and scientific progress. So think of the Industrial Revolution, for example. The Industrial Revolution, it takes on the competition with optimism and stamina and enthusiasm. It rationalizes the means to get to an end. It sees many ways to resolve a problem. It's highly self-motivated and also manipulative because it's trying to get into certain goals. It raises the quality of life, of course, but it also depletes the resources. And we see what we've done to the environment as a result of it. It depletes the natural resources. It also depletes the human resources because people are supposed to work, hard, long shifts to manifest that level of competition and progress. There is very little attention to a balanced life. And so they deplete the resources and they cause an individuation and a separation that then allows for the next level to come forward. So in the Industrial Revolution, it's like love was equivalent to success, winning the competitive race. And it was done. It has been done. A lot of corporations, a lot of people are still in that place. And a lot of families too. All these cultures also apply to families. There's cultures and families where they bring up their children to have the highest grades or to win all the competitions and to become that level of success, no matter how sacrificial it's been to the well-being, the emotional, mental, and physical well-being of the child. So they push them way too far, depleting those children from their well-being so that they can achieve what is seen as success. This happens in family, this happens in corporations, and it happens in the world. And when that depletion of resource happens, a new way of being, a new culture takes root, which we call the human bond. So we start looking at like, okay, wait a minute, success is not all that we need here. We need connection, we need community, we need inner peace. We don't need materialism, we need inner peace. And this is, think of the hippie movements, the hippie movement in the 60s or the civil rights movement, right? So love is peace. There is this idealistic way of being in the world, looking for solutions that are attentive to equality of rights. Feelings and spirituality become more important than rational thought and materialism. And a lot of movements, including the movement of spiritual inner awareness, I think grew from this human bond, creating this community open to feelings and spirituality, and peace and unity being more important than materialism and rational thought.
Yeah, it was, I grew up in they say if you remember the 60s, you weren't there, because everybody, half the people were stoned out of their head. And I know none of you are old enough to remember that, so I won't even ask you. But the flower children were really fascinating to me. The poetry written, where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing, young girls, pick them, everyone. And it went on and said, and where have all the young girls gone? And And where have all the young men gone? And gone to graveyards, everyone. And eventually, where did all the flowers go? They went from the young girls back to the young men that died during the war. Now, here I am, let's see, yeah, I'm finishing the first round of second round of education, and working in factories, and the same children of the 60s that put the flowers on the bayonets when the soldiers came home were working for the bayonet carrier. And they had ideologically very little in common. Another thing that was interesting to me is when Martin Luther King made his speech in the mall, over 1 million people showed up there, and there was no internet, and there was no advertising, and there were no pamphlets, and there was no organizer, and there was no admission fee or what have you. But the most fascinating thing to me was he didn't have a plan. He had a dream. And it was the first time I remember listening to someone that wasn't, I have a plan, it's going to work, vote for me, do this. He didn't ask for anything. He just said, I have a dream. And he explained the dream, and it changed the thought process of a lot of areas in a lot of different societies in a lot of countries around the world, because it was this idea that, it's not absolutely crazy to say love can be peace. Just because we disagree with someone doesn't mean we have to go kill them, which was always a fascinating concept to me.
Yeah, what you said, it really represents this culture of human bond that was manifesting at the time. And Dr. Martin Luther King is a great example of that. But one of the disruptions of this culture can be, and think of the hippie movements, even the movement of spiritual inner awareness, the human bond, that it's focused on feelings and spirituality and equality of rights and inner peace and unity. The disruptor can be when we get lost in self-contemplation. Mm-hmm. We lose ourselves in self-contemplation and we produce very little. And there's actually a difficulty integrating our freedom of expression, our uniqueness, with adherence to the group. And we almost become naive about love. That's the disruptor of this culture, which then opens the door for a new culture or a new evolutionary cycle that we've started seeing in the world, which is called flex flow, which becomes more flexible in their thinking. They become more focused on sustainability and technology, and in the ways reality and spirituality are interconnected. So think of like Apple, for example, or Microsoft. These are companies that are very technology based, but focus their cultures, not only company, but they create cultures that are very technology based, focused on sustainability and creating this connection between reality and spirituality as one of the same. They start transcending that self-centered emotional instinctual drive to look in ways in which we can benefit ourselves and others. There is this understanding of the interconnectivity of all humanity. So what affects one individual affects the whole. And we see this like in the green movement, save the planet, in the ways that we look for technology as a digital promise for a clean future. And of course, companies like Apple or Microsoft starts representing this. And in here, love becomes interconnectivity.
Yeah. And it was it's fascinating to me because I remember as the awareness of the Save the Planet concept, probably the most impactful phrase tagline, unique way to position that in the corporate world was to think locally, act globally. In other words, don't don't contaminate, physically, mentally, morally, verbally, don't contaminate. And all through the advertising world. I mean, when Apple started advertising, it was the underlying theme didn't really say buy my product. It said, we believe in beautiful design. We believe in empowering the actual user. We believe in the simplification and the beauty that's involved in the thought process. Oh, and we have a computer here. Would you like to buy one? They didn't say we are the largest mainframe manufacturer in the world. Would you like to buy one? And so the whole concept of love and interconnectivity and just creating a dialogue with society was kind of new.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it was really new.
But the disruptor that we see in this culture, and we've seen it very visibly throughout Steve Jobs' career, is the arrogance. There is a level of arrogance about their broader perspectives. And Steve Jobs has been reported as being very arrogant in that way.
Brilliant, but arrogant. I mean, he wouldn't say, let me explain it. He would say something like, well, anybody with the IQ or the temperature in the room would understand this.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the actual disruption, and I don't mean that negatively to Steve Jobs. I had the fascinating experience of actually, meeting him and talking to him, interviewing with him, et cetera. But the arrogance brings with it it's probably easier for me to explain what it doesn't bring. It doesn't bring inclusion. It brings exclusion. And I think inclusion is a very, very, very key part of leadership.
It's interesting when you say that, because the question came forward for me. Was he kind of like, I know where I'm going, do you want to go with me? But I know where I'm going, type of leader, that means arrogance showing up in that way, in a kind of like a divine confidence.
It was an interesting salad with too much chili pepper in it.
But here's another thing. It's he did have a view of what he wanted or what he was bringing into the world that was very strong. And in order to penetrate the world that he lived in, he had to be really strong in that vision. He had to stand in that vision with great strength, and that could have been seen as arrogance. It could have been seen as forcefulness, which it was at some times. Yeah. And so the arrogance comes also from the very heart of what they're doing and trying to bring into the world a whole new way of being. And the force that it comes can be seen as arrogance. Another disruptor of this is the technology interconnectivity actually can create a lot of chaos and a lot of other new problems. I mean, and we've been seeing this, how they are hijacking information digitally, and the governments are, President Trump was eliminated from the social media, and the Chinese on TikTok was trying to spy through. I mean, there's all kinds of other problems that come with that technology.
Yeah, and an unintended but incredible benefit is information. It was just remarkable how it was available, and people who really never had access to information all of a sudden had access. Oh, there's a different way to do things. I didn't know that. And I was a computer science major, and there's more technology in a singing Hallmark card than what I was doing. And I never had the envision of how technology would actually change the world and change people. You should see. Every time I have a problem with my computer, I go get my 14-year-old, right? And so I would really like to be arrogant and be able to teach him something about systems engineering, et cetera. But, good luck. And it forces a behavior that is very entrepreneurial and yet is not always inclusive. And it comes with not what you do or what you dream or what you want, it's how you show up and how you implement. I worked for probably one of the most dynamic and brilliant entrepreneurs, in the world. And his operating style was, I think you do.
I mean, you can see the culture that could have fit, that patriarchal culture, with segments and following that structure of a hierarchy could perhaps be representing the culture.
It actually, the previous culture created permissibility for that.
Exactly.
In other words, okay, I'm not going to conquer your country now. I'm just going to kind of dominate you intellectually for a while, but you'll be okay. It's
so
fascinating.
So moving then to the last culture level that we have observed so far, out of the disruption of the arrogance and the problems that technology can create, comes out this very new, as we all can see in the world, culture, which it's called the whole view. And it's a culture that starts to sense the order in chaos. It's a lot more comfortable with chaos and paradoxes. It starts embracing the paradox as something essential for our survival. Spirituality and physics becomes combined, and then metaphysics becomes a way of understanding and relating to our environment. It also starts seeing the the microcosmos, as it reflects on the macrocosmos, and how the macrocosmos reflects the microcosmos. So it's how the one reflects the whole, and how the whole is formed by a bunch of ones, and therefore the whole also reflects the ones. And it's a very conscious, it's very conscious of the collective, highly intuitive and experiential, because it really gets from a deeper level the communion that we all share, the communion with ourselves, with others, with the planet, with the animals, with the trees, with the air. There is a whole level of understanding of that communion. And so this view becomes very minimalist. Do we really need 5 cars? Do we really need all of it? And so it becomes minimalist. And we don't know exactly what love really is for this culture. It's a new culture that it's now starting to emerge as a result of the disruptions that we've recently seen from the previous evolutionary cycle. So we are embarking into this new cycle. And according to studies, there is actually also another evolutionary cycle starting to come forward, and they don't even have a name for it, but they are observing this evolution and registering, their observations as a way of continue explaining this. Now, the beauty of all of this, how do we apply this in our lives? It's because if we stand in the whole view culture where, we are comfortable with chaos, we are comfortable with paradox, we see how one thing reflects to another, and metaphysics instructs us, and we are talking to someone who is based on hierarchy and structure, and how you can only do your work within your segment I mean, my grandfather was very much like that.
Hmm.
My grandfather is, I say you do. I think you do, and you have to follow the orders. And if you're a child, you do not get into adults' conversation. You stay with the children. You don't come. So there was this hierarchical. And so if I had to talk to my grandfather from the perspective of like, oh, the whole reflects the one, and the one reflects the whole, and paradox, and my grandfather would go like that. It doesn't even communicate.
Sure. He look at you the way the dogs look at you, you know, and you tell them, no, don't poop in the house.
Yeah.
You know, kind of tilt their head and wag their tail. You know, just doesn't make any sense.
So having an understanding, at least, or at least a vocabulary of these different evolutionary cycles supports us in creating compassion for where others are coming from, instead of judgment, and tailoring our communication in a way that the other can receive it. It's not about good or bad or right or wrong, because we are all interconnected in this evolutionary cycle, but it's just understanding where we are all coming from and communicating from that place. Now, the interesting part is the outer evolutionary cycles contain the inner evolutionary cycles, but the inner evolutionary cycles cannot relate to the outer evolutionary cycles. So we have to keep that in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a cartoon the other day. Actually, the woman who wrote the book on spiral dynamics, she showed a cartoon that was very illustrative of this. It was two women, one dressed in a bikini, a very small bikini with high heels and very fancy, you know, the brand name handbag and brand name sunglasses. And the other one dressed in a burqa, hiding everything in black. All you could see were the eyes. So the woman in the burqa looks at the woman in the bikini and thinks, look at this woman. The only thing she's covering is the eyes. What a male-dominated society. And then the woman in the bikini with the brand name handbag and the fancy sunglasses looks at the woman in the burqa and thinks, whoa, look at her. The only thing she's showing is her eyes. What a male-dominated society. So you see, they are looking at each other from the perspective of their own culture, which is so ingrained in us that we are unconscious and we are acting from it without even knowing. And then we're trying to communicate and understand each other while we're coming from very different cultures.
I saw a cartoon the other day where there was a man and his wife and his children were obviously sitting on the couch, and he was holding a Wall Street Journal kind of down on the floor as he was standing, and it showed a graph going down, and the caption said, "I'm afraid one of you is going to have to go. Okay. Hard times, one of you is going to have to go." Now, think about that. You have trouble in business, first reaction is, let's have a layoff. What if your kid came home with 2 Ds? They'd say, that's it, you're up for adoption. We're going to find somebody else. You wouldn't even think about that. But as we've grown from a gathering of cave persons, which actually occurred about 50 million years ago, to a planet of 7.3 billion, this idea that human capital is disposable or definitive of who we are as a human race is waning quickly. So all the wars that we've been engaged in since World War II have been skirmishes compared to the ones that we've engaged in prior to that. Now, and so I think there is an awareness which comes back to the question, there's an awareness, why is the world asking for your leadership? Because the the world is looking for someone not to lead them, not that they're necessarily willing to follow them, but can we collaborate? Can we communicate? Can we integrate? Can we commune? Can we understand? And we will discover probably for the third time in human history and human
Evolution.
evolution. I'm usually saying it's not scarcity, it's scarcity.
Finish your thought.
Yeah, okay. I think for the third time in this history, we're actually going to experience why life without I'm thinking of the buzzword diversity, equity, and inclusion is absurd, because it's been proven time and time again that it builds strength, not just in cultures or communities, but even in the survival of plant life. And so we'll save that story for another day, because we want to honor your time.
Yeah. So this is what we had for you tonight. We have a few minutes left. We are going to thank you for being here with us.